The planet Veridion hung in the void like a bruised eye, half swallowed by shadow, its surface marred by jagged canyons that whispered of ancient cataclysms. The distant sun cast a sickly yellow light, barely strong enough to penetrate the thick, churning clouds that veiled the planet in perpetual twilight. Veridion was a world that had been forgotten by time, a place where the echoes of the past seemed to cling to the air, heavy and suffocating. The Vanguard, a sleek, silver craft designed for deep space reconnaissance, approached the planet with a cautious grace. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound as the crew prepared for descent. Captain Arden Drake stood at the helm, his sharp eyes fixed on the swirling mist below. He was a man of few words, his silence often mistaken for indifference, but those who knew him understood that every glance, every breath, was calculated. He had seen things in his years of service that would drive most men to madness. Yet his resolve remained unshaken. "Landing coordinates locked," said Lieutenant Mira Valen, her voice steady despite the unease that gnawed at the edges of her mind. She was the youngest member of the crew, but her intellect and instinct had earned her a place on the team. Her fingers danced over the controls, her focus unyielding as she guided the Vanguard through the atmosphere. Visuals online in 3, 2, 1. The ship's sensors pierced through the clouds, revealing the planet's surface in stark detail. What they saw brought a chill to the room. The landscape was a wasteland of twisted metal and fractured stone. Ruins of a once great civilization lay scattered like the bones of a long-dead beast, their architecture alien and inscrutable. Towering spires, half collapsed and covered in a thick, obsidian growth, loomed over the desolate plains, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when observed. It was as if the planet itself resisted understanding, its secrets buried deep within layers of forgotten history. "Picking up traces of an unknown energy signature," Valen reported, her brow furrowed as she analyzed the data. "It's faint, but there's something down there, something ancient." Drake's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking onto a particularly large structure in the distance. Unlike the others, this one stood mostly intact, its form almost reminiscent of a temple, though any religious purpose it once served had long since been lost to time. It exuded a palpable sense of dread, as if the very air around it was charged with a malevolent force. "That's our target," Drake said, his voice a low rumble. "We go in, we find out what happened to the research team, and we get out. No unnecessary risks." The rest of the crew, hardened veterans all, nodded in agreement. They knew the risks of exploring such a place, but they also knew the importance of their mission. The previous research team, composed of some of the brightest minds in the galaxy, had vanished without a trace, their final transmission little more than a garbled mess of static and cryptic warnings. The authorities had deemed the mission too dangerous to continue, but Drake's team was no ordinary crew. They specialized in the unknown, the unsolvable, and the incomprehensible. The Vanguard descended further, the temperature gauges fluctuating wildly as the ship passed through layers of atmosphere that defied conventional understanding. The air outside grew thick, almost viscous, as if it resisted the intrusion of anything not born of Veridion's mysterious soil. Finally, with a soft thud, the ship touched down on the surface, its landing gears sinking slightly into the ashen ground. A deathly silence greeted the crew as the engines powered down, the oppressive quiet only broken by the faint hum of the ship's systems. "Suit up," Drake ordered. "We move in pairs. Stay alert and stay together." The crew donned their exosuits, the black, armored fabric designed to withstand a wide range of environmental hazards. Each suit was equipped with a visor that provided a detailed HUD, along with advanced scanning technology that could detect even the faintest life signs. The suits also carried built-in communication systems, allowing the crew to stay in constant contact, even if the planet's bizarre energy fields tried to interfere. Drake and Valen led the way, their boots crunching against the strange, crystalline dust that coated the ground. Behind them, Sergeant Kellen Rourke and Specialist Lydia Tran flanked the rear, their weapons at the ready. Rourke, a mountain of a man with a scarred face that spoke of countless battles, kept his gaze scanning the horizon, ever vigilant for threats. Tran, a technological genius with a penchant for breaking into systems that should have been unbreakable, had her eyes fixed on the readouts, searching for any anomaly that could spell trouble. The temple loomed ahead, its silhouette sharp and foreboding against the dull sky. As they approached, the ground beneath them began to vibrate, a low, thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from deep within the planet. It was a sound that resonated in their bones, filling them with an inexplicable sense of dread. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings," Valen said, her voice tinged with concern. "The energy signature is getting stronger as we get closer, but it's not like anything I've seen before. It's almost as if it's aware of us." Drake's jaw tightened. "Stay focused. Whatever it is, we're going to find out soon enough." As they neared the entrance of the temple, the vibrations intensified, causing the very air to hum with unseen energy. The doorway before them was massive, carved from a material that seemed to drink in the light, making it impossible to discern its true color. The symbols etched into the stone were more pronounced here, their shapes twisting into patterns that defied logic, each curve and angle a challenge to the mind's ability to comprehend. Rourke stepped forward, his hand outstretched to touch the door, but before he could make contact, a blinding light erupted from the symbols, causing the team to stagger back in shock. The light was not just bright, it was invasive, piercing through their visors and directly into their minds. For a brief moment, each member of the crew saw something different: images, memories, nightmares all flickering across their vision in a disjointed, horrifying sequence. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished, leaving them gasping for breath, their minds reeling from the onslaught. "What the hell was that?" Rourke growled, his voice trembling with uncharacteristic fear. I don't know," Valen replied, her voice shaky. "But it felt alive, like it was trying to communicate, or invade our thoughts." Drake didn't respond immediately, his mind racing as he processed what had just happened. This was no ordinary temple, no mere relic of a forgotten civilization. Whatever lay within these walls was something far more dangerous, far more alien than anything they had encountered before. "Stay sharp," he finally said, his voice steely. "We're not turning back now." With a deep breath, Drake stepped forward, the others following close behind. The door, now inert, slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dark corridor that seemed to stretch on endlessly into the depths of the planet. As they crossed the threshold, the sense of dread intensified, the air growing thick with a palpable malevolence. The walls were lined with more of the shifting symbols, their patterns becoming increasingly chaotic the deeper they went. Every step echoed ominously, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness that surrounded them. And then, as they reached what felt like the heart of the temple, they found it a massive chamber, its walls covered in the same dark material as the exterior. At the center of the room stood a monolithic structure, its form impossible to fully comprehend, as if it existed in multiple dimensions at once. The energy signature was strongest here, a pulsating, living force that seemed to throb in time with their heartbeats. It was as if the structure was the source of the planet's mystery, a focal point for the unnatural energies that permeated Veridion. But before they could approach, a low growl echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls and sending shivers down their spines. It was a sound that was both alien and terrifyingly familiar, a primal noise that spoke of hunger, rage, and something far more sinister. In the shadows at the far end of the chamber, something moved, a massive, hulking figure that defied description, its form shifting and writhing, as if it were made of the darkness itself. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy had found them. The chamber was vast, a cavernous expanse that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The walls, slick with a substance that reflected no light, pulsed in rhythm with the energy that filled the air, each beat sending a shudder through the crew's bones. The monolithic structure at the chamber's center loomed like an ancient god, inscrutable and terrifying, its surface alive with the same shifting symbols that had assaulted their minds at the temple's entrance. Captain Drake tightened his grip on his weapon, his gaze fixed on the darkness where the growl had originated. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained stoic. the years of training and experience suppressing the primal fear that threatened to overtake him. This was no ordinary mission, no simple rescue or reconnaissance. They had stepped into a place where the natural laws of the universe seemed to twist and warp, where the very air conspired against their sanity. The creature in the shadows moved again, its presence a black stain against the already oppressive darkness. It was enormous, its form shifting with each step, as if it were made of the very shadows it inhabited. No light could catch its shape. It was all wrong, a distortion in reality that defied logic and understanding. The only constant was its eyes glowing, hateful orbs that pierced the void, locking onto the intruders with an intelligence that was as ancient as it was malevolent. "It's watching us," Valen whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands hovered over her controls, her mind racing to make sense of the readings. But the data was incoherent, the creature's presence scrambling every known sensor and algorithm. Drake didn't need a scanner to confirm what he felt in his gut. This thing was not just watching, it was judging. It was weighing them, measuring them against some alien standard of worthiness or threat. The thought sent a chill down his spine. This predator was not merely a beast. It was something far more dangerous, a creature of purpose, with intentions that stretched beyond simple survival. "Stay close," Drake ordered, his voice low and controlled, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to run. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before we make any moves." The team tightened their formation, weapons drawn, their breaths shallow as they advanced cautiously into the chamber. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, the air thickening into something almost tangible, like walking through a dream where every movement required immense effort. The energy that had once been a background hum was now a roar, a constant assault on their senses that threatened to tear their minds apart. As they neared the monolith, Drake felt it, a pulse of something ancient, a presence that had been dormant for eons but was now awakening. The symbols on the structure's surface shifted, their patterns accelerating, becoming more chaotic, more aggressive. It was as if the monolith itself was alive, responding to their intrusion with growing hostility. "Captain, I'm getting something strange," Tran said, her voice barely audible over the deafening energy. She was staring at her scanner, her face pale. "It's like the entire structure is thinking. I don't know how to describe it, but it's reacting to us, almost like it's aware." Drake nodded, his eyes never leaving the creature in the shadows. The monolith wasn't just a relic. It was a conduit, a nexus for whatever malevolent force governed this place. And the creature, the entity that stalked them, was its guardian. Or perhaps something even more terrifying, its prisoner. "We need to understand this thing," Drake said, his voice firm despite the dread curling in his stomach. "If this structure is connected to the predator, it might be the key to defeating it. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and—" He never got to finish. The creature lunged from the shadows with a speed that defied comprehension, a blur of darkness and malice that tore through the air like a force of nature. Rourke, ever vigilant, fired his weapon in a desperate attempt to halt its advance. But the bullets seemed to vanish into the creature's form, swallowed by the void that made up its body. For a brief, terrifying moment, the creature was upon them, its eyes burning with an intensity that spoke of ancient, unending hatred. It was a hatred that transcended time, born from a place of deep, unfathomable darkness, a loathing for everything that lived, everything that dared to exist in its presence. Drake reacted on instinct, grabbing Valen and pulling her out of the creature's path just as it swiped at her with a clawed appendage that seemed to shift in and out of reality. The impact of the near miss sent shockwaves through the ground, causing the entire chamber to tremble. "We can't fight this thing head-on," Valen shouted, her voice laced with panic as she regained her footing. "It's like fighting a nightmare." Drake's mind raced. This was no ordinary predator. It was something far more insidious, something that existed beyond the physical plane, where the rules of reality didn't apply. But despite the terror that clawed at his mind, he knew they couldn't afford to retreat. If they ran now, they would never escape this place, and the truth of Veridion would remain buried in darkness. "Fall back to the entrance," Drake commanded. "We need to regroup and—" Before he could finish, the creature reared back, its form expanding, consuming the shadows around it until it filled the chamber with its presence. It let out a roar that wasn't just a sound, but a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred, a force that battered against their minds, threatening to shatter their sanity. In that moment, Drake understood. This wasn't just a predator, it was a manifestation of the planet's will, a living embodiment of the darkness that had consumed Veridion long ago, and it would stop at nothing to ensure that its secrets remained hidden. "Move, now!" Drake shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as the team sprinted towards the entrance, the creature hot on their heels. But as they ran, Drake's mind worked furiously, piecing together fragments of what they had seen, what they had felt. This place was a prison for something so ancient and powerful that it had to be locked away in a world forgotten by time. The monolith was the key, and the creature was its jailer, bound to this place for eternity, its hatred fueled by millennia of isolation. But something had changed. The arrival of the research team, the activation of the monolith, it had all been part of a process, a sequence of events that had awakened the predator, drawn it back into the world of the living. And now, Drake and his team were caught in the middle of a war they couldn't hope to understand, a battle between forces far beyond their comprehension. They reached the entrance just as the creature lunged again, its form distorting as it crossed the threshold into the corridor. But instead of following them, it recoiled, its body writhing as if in pain. The monolith behind them flared with a blinding light, and the creature let out a deafening roar, its body collapsing into itself before retreating back into the darkness of the chamber. The light faded, and the corridor was plunged back into silence, the only sound the ragged breathing of the crew as they tried to process what had just happened. "It can't leave the chamber," Valen said, her voice hoarse. "The monolith, it's keeping it trapped there." Drake nodded, his mind still reeling from the encounter. "But for how long? If it's connected to the monolith, and the monolith is responding to us, we might be accelerating whatever process is happening here." The team stood in the corridor, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a leaden shroud. They had come here to find answers, to rescue their lost comrades, but now they were faced with a far greater challenge, a mystery that defied reason, a force that could unravel the very fabric of reality. But in that moment of despair, a spark of resolve ignited within Drake. They were not just explorers, they were human, and humans had faced the impossible before. They had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Whatever this place was, whatever forces were at work here, they would face it head-on. They would not be cowed by the darkness, no matter how deep or ancient. "Whatever's happening here, we need to figure it out," Drake said, his voice steady with determination. "We're not leaving until we know the truth. And if that means facing this thing again, then so be it." The team exchanged grim looks, but there was no hesitation, no doubt. They were in this together, and they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. They turned back towards the chamber, the air thick with tension and unspoken fears. The monolith awaited them, its secrets buried deep within layers of time and space, and the predator, bound to this place by chains of ancient hatred, lurked just beyond the veil. But they would not be deterred. They were human, and humans, above all else, sought answers, even if those answers lay in the heart of darkness. The corridor stretched before them like the gullet of some ancient beast, winding deeper into the planet's core. Each step took the crew further from the safety of their ship and closer to the source of the mystery that had drawn them here. The oppressive atmosphere clung to them, a tangible weight that grew heavier with every passing second. The silence was maddening, broken only by the distant, rhythmic pulse that emanated from the monolith, a heartbeat of the planet itself. Captain Drake led the way, his every sense on high alert. The encounter with the creature had shaken him, but it had also ignited a fire within, a determination to understand, to conquer whatever lay at the heart of this dark place. His hand hovered near his weapon, but he knew instinctively that brute force would not be enough. This was a battle of wills, of minds. The creature had tested them, probed their weaknesses, but they had survived. Now it was their turn to strike back, not with violence, but with knowledge. As they ventured deeper, The symbols on the walls grew more chaotic, more aggressive. What had once been orderly, if incomprehensible, patterns now twisted and writhed, defying logic and reason. They were alive, or something close to it, shifting in ways that the human mind could not fully grasp. The crew could feel them, not just see them. Each symbol seemed to vibrate with an energy that resonated in their bones, in their very souls. These symbols, Valen murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the energy that filled the air. They're not just writing. They're something else. I can feel them, like they're trying to communicate, but it's not through language. It's through emotion. Drake glanced at her, noting the strain in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. Hold it together, Valen, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. We can't let this place get to us. Whatever it's trying to do, we have to stay focused. Valen nodded, swallowing hard as she forced herself to look away from the walls. I know, Captain. It's like they're alive, like they're reaching into my mind, trying to pull something out. Drake felt it too, the sense that the symbols were not just passive markings, but active participants in the unfolding events. They were watching, waiting, perhaps even guiding the crew deeper into the darkness. But to what end? As they turned a corner, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber, larger than anything they had seen before. The ceiling was lost in shadow, the walls lined with more of the shifting symbols, their movements now almost frantic. But what dominated the space was another structure, similar to the monolith, but different, smaller, more intricate, its surface covered in what appeared to be a complex network of veins or conduits, glowing with a faint, sickly light. At the center of the room, a platform rose from the floor, its surface etched with even more symbols, these ones pulsing with a dull, rhythmic glow that matched the beat of the energy they had felt since entering the temple. The platform seemed to be some kind of altar, though its purpose was as inscrutable as everything else in this place. But what drew their attention most was what lay atop the altar, a series of objects, carefully arranged as if in some ancient ritual. There were tools of unknown origin, their shapes unfamiliar and unsettling, as if they had been designed by a mind that did not fully understand or care about human ergonomics. There were also fragments of what appeared to be some kind of fabric or skin, their texture unlike anything the crew had ever seen. And at the center, cradled in a shallow depression, was a small, crystalline structure, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse in time with the beating energy of the chamber. "What is this place?" Tran whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the sight. "It's like some kind of laboratory, but it's so old, so alien." "Not just a laboratory," Rourke said, his voice low and grim. "It's a shrine. Look at the way everything's arranged, the care that went into placing these objects. Whatever this was, it wasn't just science. It was ritual. It was worship." Drake approached the altar slowly, his gaze fixed on the crystalline structure at its center. There was something about it, something that drew him in, a feeling that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. It was as if the crystal held a piece of the puzzle, a key to understanding not just the temple, but the planet itself. He reached out, his hand hovering over the crystal. As his fingers brushed its surface, a jolt of energy shot through him, sending a shockwave of sensation through his body. His vision blurred, the world around him dissolving into a maelstrom of color and sound. He was no longer in the chamber, no longer on Veridion. He was elsewhere. He saw visions, flashes of light, of worlds being born and destroyed, of beings beyond comprehension moving through the void. He saw the temple, whole and vibrant, surrounded by a city of impossible architecture, filled with creatures that defied understanding. He felt their thoughts, their emotions, a mix of curiosity, fear, and something darker, something that twisted in the depths of their collective consciousness. And then he saw the predator. It was not born of this world, nor was it a natural part of the universe. It was a construct, a creation of minds far more advanced, far more malevolent than anything humanity had ever encountered. It had been designed, engineered to serve a purpose, one that involved destruction, consumption, and the erasure of entire civilizations. But something had gone wrong. The creators had lost control, and the predator had turned on them, devouring its makers before being trapped, imprisoned within the temple, bound by the very energy that now pulsed through the planet's core. The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun, and Drake staggered back, gasping for breath as the world snapped back into focus. He was in the chamber, his hands still resting on the crystal, but now he understood. He knew what they were dealing with, and the knowledge filled him with a cold, hollow dread. "It's a prison," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This entire planet, this temple, it's a prison designed to contain that creature, that thing. It was created by something, some civilization far older than us, but they lost control, and now it's waking up." The team stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in like a lead weight. "So what do we do?" Rourke asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed fear. "How do we stop it? How do we make sure it doesn't escape?" Drake shook his head, his mind racing. The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: they couldn't leave, not yet. They had to find a way to either re-establish the prison's power or destroy the Predator entirely. But how? The technology, the energy, everything here was beyond them, beyond human comprehension. "We need more information," Drake said finally. "There has to be something here, some clue as to how they contained it. We have to keep looking, keep pushing forward. We can't let this thing get loose." But even as he said the words, he knew the truth. They were running out of time. The creature was growing stronger, its bonds weakening with each passing moment, and if they couldn't find a way to stop it, the thought was too terrible to contemplate. "Let's move," Drake ordered, turning away from the altar. "We'll explore the rest of the temple. There has to be something we've missed." The crew fell in behind him, their expressions grim, their resolve unshaken despite the mounting terror. They had come here to find answers, and they would not leave until they had them, no matter the cost. As they left the chamber, the energy pulse grew stronger, the symbols on the walls writhing in ever more chaotic patterns. The Predator was awakening, its hatred seeping into the very fabric of the temple, corrupting everything it touched. And somewhere deep within the planet, the final seal on its prison began to crack. The path ahead was a descent into madness. As the crew ventured deeper into the temple, the air grew thicker, laden with an oppressive energy that seemed to sap their strength, cloud their thoughts. The pulse of the monolith resonated through the walls, a constant reminder that they were intruding on something ancient, something that had been buried for eons. Captain Drake led the way, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of what they sought. The visions from the crystal had left him shaken, but more determined than ever. They were not just exploring a ruin. They were navigating the remnants of a civilization that had tampered with forces beyond their control, and in doing so, had unleashed a terror that now threatened to consume them. The corridor narrowed as they continued, the walls closing in as if the temple itself sought to crush them. The symbols that had once writhed with life now seemed to wither, their energy fading as they moved further from the central chamber. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft echoes of their footsteps. Valen kept close to Drake, her scanner clutched tightly in her hands. The data it was feeding her made no sense, readings that fluctuated wildly, defying all known laws of physics. She could feel the temple's energy pressing in on her mind, like 1,000 voices whispering just beyond the edge of comprehension. "It's like this place is decaying," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "The further we go, the weaker the energy becomes. But it's not just that, it's like the temple itself is dying." Drake glanced at her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. They were all feeling it, the strain, the exhaustion. But they couldn't stop now. They were too close. "Keep it together, Valen," Drake said, his tone firm but reassuring. "We're almost there. We just need to find something, anything that can give us a clue on how to stop this thing." As they rounded a corner, the corridor opened up into another chamber, smaller than the last, but no less imposing. The walls here were different, less adorned with symbols and more with what appeared to be carvings, reliefs that depicted scenes from a time long forgotten. The carvings were crude, their lines harsh and angular, but they told a story of a great war, of a civilization that had once thrived on this planet, only to be torn apart by the very thing they had created. The figures in the carvings were not human, their forms twisted and alien, but there was something disturbingly familiar about them, something that resonated with a primal part of Drake's mind. This is their history, Rourke said, his voice hushed as he approached the carvings. This is what happened to them. The reliefs depicted scenes of great technological marvel, cities that towered above the clouds, machines that defied explanation. But then the scenes changed. The cities crumbled, the machines fell silent, and a great darkness descended upon the world. The last carving was the most disturbing, a single figure, towering over the ruins of the civilization, its eyes burning with a hatred that transcended time. "That's it," Tran said, pointing to the figure. "That's the predator." Drake nodded, his eyes fixed on the carving. "They created it, and it destroyed them." "But why?" Valen asked, her voice trembling. "Why would they create something like this? What were they trying to do?" Rourke studied the carvings for a long moment before answering. "Power," he said finally. "They wanted power, control. They tampered with forces they didn't understand, and it destroyed them." Drake stepped closer to the wall, his fingers tracing the lines of the carving. The figure of the predator seemed to pulse with a dark energy, even here, centuries after the civilization had fallen. The hatred it embodied was still alive, still seething with a rage that had not diminished over time. "We need to find the source," Drake said, turning to the others. "The predator is still bound to this place, but those bonds are weakening. If we can find out how they contained it in the first place, maybe we can strengthen those bonds, or find a way to destroy it." The team exchanged uncertain glances, but there was no dissent. They had come this far, and they couldn't turn back now. They had to see this through, whatever the cost. As they moved further into the chamber, they noticed something strange, a series of alcoves, each containing what appeared to be statues. But as they approached, it became clear that these were not statues at all. The figures within the alcoves were mummified, their bodies preserved by some unknown process, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. They were the inhabitants of this world, the ones who had created the predator, and who had paid the ultimate price for their hubris. Valen gasped as she realized what they were seeing. These are the creators. They must have sealed themselves in here, trying to escape the predator, but it found them." Drake studied the mummified figures, his heart heavy with a mix of pity and revulsion. These beings had once been masters of their world, creators of wonders, but their quest for power had led to their destruction. Now, they were nothing more than husks, forgotten by time, their achievements buried beneath the ruins of their civilization. "They were trying to stop it," Rourke said, his voice quiet. "They sealed themselves in here, hoping to find a way to defeat the predator, but they failed." Drake nodded slowly. "But we don't have to. We know more now. We have to keep going, and find out what they discovered before it was too late." They moved past the alcoves, leaving the mummified remains of the creators behind, as they continued deeper into the temple. The air grew colder, the energy more erratic, as if the temple itself was reacting to their presence, trying to drive them away. The corridor finally ended at a massive door, its surface covered in the same shifting symbols that had adorned the monolith. But these symbols were different. They were chaotic, almost frantic, as if they were trying to convey something urgent, something vital. Drake approached the door, his hand hovering over the control panel. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the tension that gripped his chest. "Whatever's behind this door, it's the key. It has to be." The others gathered around him, their faces grim but resolute. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever lay beyond that door, they would face it together. Drake took a deep breath and activated the control panel. The door groaned as it began to open, the ancient mechanisms protesting the movement after centuries of inactivity. A blast of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, something ancient and malevolent. As the door fully opened, they were met with a sight that none of them could have expected. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls lined with more of the mummified figures, but these were different. They were adorned in elaborate robes, their bodies positioned in what appeared to be ritualistic poses, their hands outstretched towards the center of the room. And at the center, suspended in the air by some unseen force, was a figure unlike anything they had seen before. It was humanoid, but its features were twisted, deformed, as if it had been caught halfway between transformation and stasis. Its eyes were open, glowing with the same malevolent light as the predator's, and its mouth was frozen in a silent scream. This is it," Valen whispered, her voice trembling. "This is the key. This is what they used to contain the predator." Drake felt a wave of revulsion wash over him as he realized what he was looking at. This figure had once been one of the creators, but something had gone horribly wrong. They had tried to bind the predator's essence to this being, to use it as a vessel, but the process had failed, leaving this creature trapped in an eternal state of agony. "They tried to control it," Drake said, his voice filled with disgust. "They tried to use this thing as a weapon, but it backfired. They created something worse, something that even they couldn't control." The others stared at the figure in horror, their minds struggling to comprehend the full extent of what the creators had done. They had not just created a predator, they had tried to harness its power, to bend it to their will, and in doing so, had unleashed something far more dangerous. "We need to destroy it," Rourke said, his voice trembling with anger. "We can't let this abomination exist, not even for a second longer." Drake nodded, his resolve hardening. "But how? We don't even know what kind of energy we're dealing with here." Valen stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the figure. I think we can use the monolith. If we can redirect its energy, channel it into this chamber, we might be able to sever the connection, destroy the link between the predator and this thing." Drake considered her words, his mind racing through the possibilities. It was a gamble, but it was the only option they had. If they didn't act, the predator would continue to grow stronger, and eventually it would break free. "All right," Drake said finally. "Let's do it. We'll head back to the monolith, set up the energy transfer, and destroy this creature once and for all." With renewed determination, the crew set out to execute their plan, knowing that the stakes had never been higher. They were racing against time, fighting not just for their own survival, but for the survival of every living being in the galaxy. As they made their way back to the central chamber, the weight of their task pressed down upon them, but they knew they couldn't afford to falter. The predator was waiting, its hunger growing, and the fate of countless worlds rested in their hands. The oppressive silence of the corridor pressed down on them as the crew retreated from the Chamber of Horrors. Each echoing footstep felt like a drumbeat in the macabre symphony of the temple. Drake led, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts, the grotesque figure suspended in mid-transformation, the creator's desperation etched in their mummified remains, the looming threat of the predator. Reaching a relatively open space, Drake signaled a halt. The crew gathered around him, their breaths fogging in the frigid air. Despite the chill, sweat clung to their brows, a testament to the harrowing ordeal they had just faced. "We can't let that thing get loose," Drake's voice was firm, cutting through the tense silence. "Valen, any thoughts on how we can use the monolith?" Valen's eyes were still wide with the shock of their discovery, but her mind was already racing. "The monolith is the source of the energy that binds the predator. If we can tap into it, redirect it." She trailed off, her brow furrowed in concentration. Tran stepped forward, her fingers dancing over her scanner. "I'm detecting a series of conduits running from the central chamber to the other parts of the temple. If we can access those conduits, we might be able to channel the energy, overload the chamber." Drake finished her thought. He turned to Rourke. "Sergeant, any structural weaknesses we can exploit?" Rourke surveyed their surroundings, his gaze sweeping over the ancient walls. "This entire place is a death trap waiting to collapse. But if we can trigger a localized collapse in that chamber, we bury the abomination and cut off the predator's connection to it." Drake nodded. A plan was forming, a desperate gamble against an ancient evil. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." Hope, however fragile, flickered in the crew's eyes. They had a plan, a chance, however slim, to turn the tide. The grim determination on their faces was a stark contrast to the chilling emptiness of the temple. Drake laid out the strategy. They would split into 2 teams. Tran and Valen would work on accessing the conduits near the monolith, while he and Rourke would act as the bait, luring the predator back into the chamber. "This relies on the creature's predictable aggression," Drake warned. "We need to draw it out, give Tran and Valen enough time to do their work." Rourke cracked a humorless grin. "Always wanted to play Matador to an interdimensional horror. Let's just hope we don't end up as the bull." The tension was palpable as they made their way back to the central chamber. Every shadow seemed to harbor a lurking threat, every whisper of the wind a chilling reminder of the predator's presence. Drake and Rourke took positions near the entrance, their weapons trained on the darkness beyond. The silence was agonizing, each second stretching into an eternity. Drake fought to keep his breathing steady, his mind replaying the horrors they had witnessed. Then, a low growl echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver down their spines. The predator was near. It emerged from the shadows, its form a writhing mass of darkness, its eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. It paused, sensing their presence, its grotesque head tilting as if savoring the anticipation of the hunt. "Showtime," Drake muttered, his voice barely a whisper. He stepped into the chamber, his movements deliberate, calculated to provoke the creature. The predator reacted instantly, its form surging forward with a speed that defied belief. Drake sprinted back towards the entrance, Rourke providing covering fire. The creature was gaining on them, its claws raking the ground, leaving deep furrows in the ancient stone. They burst into the corridor, the predator hot on their heels. The chase was on. The corridor echoed with the thunder of their footsteps and the guttural roars of the predator. Drake and Rourke weaved through the labyrinthine passages, their hearts pounding in their chests. The creature was relentless, its presence a suffocating darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. They reached a junction, the path splitting into 2. Without hesitation, Drake veered left, Rourke following close behind. They sprinted down the corridor, their exosuits straining to keep up with the sudden bursts of speed. A deafening roar echoed behind them, followed by the sickening crunch of stone. The predator had smashed through a wall, taking a shortcut. It was gaining on them, its monstrous form filling the corridor, its claws inches from their heels. Drake's breath hitched in his throat. They were running out of time. They needed to reach the central chamber, give Tran and Valen the chance to finish their work. Ahead, he saw a glimmer of light, the entrance to the chamber. He pushed himself harder, his legs burning with exertion. They burst into the chamber, the predator mere steps behind. Drake dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Rourke unleashed a volley of fire, the bullets impacting the creature's form with a sickening squelch, but doing little to slow it down. "Tran, Valen, status," Drake shouted, his voice hoarse. "Almost there, Captain," Tran's voice crackled over the comms, a hint of desperation in her tone. "Just a few more connections." The predator roared, its frustration palpable. It lunged at Rourke, who barely managed to roll out of the way. The creature's claws gouged deep into the stone floor, sending tremors through the chamber. Suddenly, the monolith at the center flared with an intense light. The energy in the room surged, the air crackling with raw power. The predator recoiled, its form flickering as if caught in a turbulent current. "It's working," Valen's voice was triumphant. "We've got it." But their celebration was short-lived. The ground beneath them buckled, the ancient stone groaning under the strain of the unleashed energy. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and chunks of the ceiling began to crumble. The predator let out a deafening roar, its form twisting and contorting as it fought against the surge of energy. The monolith pulsed, its light growing brighter, threatening to consume the entire chamber. Drake's heart sank. The trap had worked, but not as they had planned. They had unleashed a force they couldn't control, and now the entire temple was on the verge of collapse. The chamber was descending into chaos. Chunks of debris rained down from the ceiling, and the floor beneath their feet trembled violently. The predator, caught in the maelstrom of energy, thrashed and roared, its form flickering in and out of existence. "We have to get out of here," Drake shouted over the din. He grabbed Valen's arm and pulled her towards the exit. Rourke, ever the protector, covered their retreat, firing his weapon at the collapsing ceiling in a futile attempt to clear a path. They stumbled into the corridor, the ground still shaking beneath them. The once solid walls were now riddled with cracks, threatening to give way at any moment. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of ozone. Behind them, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the temple. The shock waves sent them sprawling, their exosuits absorbing the brunt of the impact. When Drake finally managed to push himself up, the entrance to the chamber was sealed, a wall of rubble blocking their path. The predator was trapped, but so were Tran and Valen. "Tran, Valen, can you hear me?" Drake's voice was frantic, his heart pounding in his chest. Static crackled over the comms, followed by Tran's strained voice. "We're alive, Captain, but we're trapped. The conduits collapsed." Drake's stomach churned. They had succeeded in containing the predator, but at what cost? "We're coming for you," he said, his voice firm. "Just hold on." But even as he spoke the words, he knew it was a lie. The temple was collapsing around them, and there was no way to reach Tran and Valen in time. Despair threatened to engulf Drake as he stared at the impassable wall of rubble. He had always prided himself on his ability to make the tough calls, to lead his team through the most harrowing situations. But now, faced with the prospect of abandoning two of his own, he felt a helplessness he had never known before. Images flashed through his mind: Valen's bright smile as she joined the crew, Tran's quiet confidence as she cracked codes that baffled even the most seasoned experts. They were more than just crewmates, they were family, and now he was about to leave them to die. Rourke placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm. "We have to keep moving, Captain," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "The whole place is coming down. We won't do them any good if we're buried alongside them." Drake nodded, his throat tight. He knew Rourke was right, but the guilt gnawed at him. He had sworn to protect his team, and he had failed. As they navigated the crumbling corridors, the weight of their failure pressed down on them. The predator's roars grew fainter, replaced by the ominous creaking and groaning of the dying temple. Each tremor sent a fresh wave of dust and debris raining down on them, a constant reminder of their impending doom. Drake's mind drifted back to his early days in the academy, the idealistic young man who had dreamed of exploring the stars, of uncovering the secrets of the universe. He had seen wonders beyond imagination, faced dangers that would make most men tremble, but nothing had prepared him for this: the crushing weight of responsibility, the agonizing choice between duty and compassion. He thought of his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Lily. He had promised them he would return, that he would be there to watch Lily take her first steps, to hear her first words. Now, those promises seemed like distant echoes, fading into the abyss of this forsaken planet. Rourke's voice broke through his reverie. "Captain, look." Drake snapped back to the present, his gaze following Rourke's pointing finger. Ahead, a faint glimmer of light shone through a crack in the wall. It was a way out, a chance to escape the collapsing temple. Hope flickered in Drake's chest, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of guilt. They couldn't leave Tran and Valen behind. "We can't just leave them," Drake said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to Rourke, his eyes pleading. "There has to be a way to get them out." Rourke's face was grim. "The whole place is coming down, Captain. We're lucky to have found this way out. If we stay any longer," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Drake clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He knew Rourke was right, but the thought of abandoning his crewmates was unbearable. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the images of Tran and Valen, trapped and alone in the collapsing temple. Suddenly, a memory surfaced: a training exercise back on Earth, a simulation of a cave-in. The instructor had stressed the importance of staying calm, of assessing the situation before acting. Drake opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping over the crumbling corridor. He forced himself to focus, to think clearly. They were deep within the temple, the energy signature fading with each step. But the predator was still trapped in the central chamber, its roars now distant rumbles. "The energy," Drake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's weaker here." Rourke frowned. "What are you getting at, Captain?" "The predator," Drake continued, his mind racing. "It's connected to the monolith, to the source of the energy, but that energy is fading the further we get from the central chamber. What if?" He trailed off, a daring idea taking shape in his mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. "What if we can lure it here?" he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If we can get it away from the monolith, maybe we can weaken it, give Tran and Valen a chance to escape." Rourke stared at him, his expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. "That's suicide, Captain. It almost killed us back there." "It's our only chance," Drake insisted. "We have to try." He turned to the crack in the wall, the sliver of light beckoning them towards safety. But he couldn't take that path, not yet. Not while two of his crew were still in danger. With a newfound sense of purpose, Drake drew his weapon and stepped back into the corridor. "Let's go hunting." The corridor stretched before them, a treacherous path through the dying temple. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and the lingering echoes of the predator's rage. Drake led the way, his every sense heightened, his weapon held ready. Rourke followed close behind, his massive frame a reassuring presence in the encroaching darkness. Drake's plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would use themselves as bait, drawing the predator further away from the monolith, hoping the weakening energy field would give them an advantage. It was a desperate gamble, but they had no other choice. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust that coated the floor. Drake kept his eyes peeled for any sign of movement, any subtle shift in the shadows that might betray the predator's presence. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient structures settling around them. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, Drake's mind raced. He needed to understand the predator, to find its weakness. The visions he had seen in the crystal chamber had given him a glimpse into its nature, but they had also left him with more questions than answers. What was this creature? Where had it come from? And why had the creators tried to harness its power? The answers, he knew, lay somewhere within the crumbling walls of this temple. But time was running out. They had to find a way to stop the predator before it broke free and unleashed its fury upon the galaxy. They reached a junction, the corridor splitting into two paths. Drake paused, his instincts telling him to take the left fork. He motioned to Rourke, and they moved forward, their weapons raised. The corridor narrowed, the walls closing in on them like the jaws of a trap. The air grew colder, the energy field fluctuating wildly, sending shivers down their spines. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the passage, sending a wave of adrenaline through Drake's veins. The predator was near. The growl grew louder and closer. Drake and Rourke pressed themselves against the wall, their breaths held in anticipation. The predator rounded the corner, its monstrous form filling the narrow corridor. Its eyes, glowing with malevolent intent, locked onto them, and a guttural roar erupted from its throat. Drake fired his weapon, the energy blast ricocheting off the creature's shadowy hide. Rourke followed suit, his heavy machine gun spitting a stream of bullets that seemed to dissipate harmlessly into the darkness. The predator lunged, its claws outstretched. Drake rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The creature's momentum carried it past them, its claws scraping against the wall, leaving deep gouges in the ancient stone. Drake and Rourke seized the opportunity, sprinting back down the corridor. They had to keep moving, keep the predator away from the monolith. The chase was on, a frantic dance through the crumbling labyrinth. The predator was faster, stronger, but they had one advantage: their knowledge of the temple's layout. They ducked through narrow passages, vaulted over fallen debris, and used every obstacle to their advantage. Drake's mind worked furiously, analyzing the predator's movements, searching for any sign of weakness. He remembered the visions from the crystal, the creature's creation, its purpose, its rage. There had to be something, some flaw in its design, some vulnerability they could exploit. As they ran, Drake noticed something peculiar. The further they moved from the central chamber, the less solid the predator seemed. Its form flickered, its movements becoming less precise, less coordinated. "Rourke," Drake shouted over the comms. "Do you see that? It's getting weaker." Rourke glanced back at the pursuing creature, his eyes widening in surprise. "You're right, Captain. It's like it's losing its grip on reality." A spark of hope ignited in Drake's chest. The plan was working. The weakening energy field was affecting the predator, disrupting its connection to the source of its power. But they couldn't let up now. They had to push it further, stretch its limits, until it was vulnerable enough to be defeated. The chase intensified, a desperate ballet of survival through the decaying corridors of the ancient temple. Drake and Rourke pushed their bodies to the limit, their exosuits whining under the strain. The predator, though weakened, was still a terrifying force, its claws tearing through the walls, its roars echoing through the crumbling structure. They reached a long, straight corridor, its end shrouded in darkness. Drake risked a glance back. The predator was closing in, its shadowy form flickering like a dying flame. But its eyes still burned with an unholy light, and Drake knew they couldn't let their guard down for a second. As they sprinted down the corridor, Drake felt a surge of defiance rising within him. This creature, this abomination, had terrorized countless worlds, extinguished entire civilizations. It had haunted his dreams since he first set foot on Veridion. But now, he saw something else in its eyes, not just rage, but fear. The predator was afraid. It sensed its power waning, its connection to the monolith faltering. And in that fear, Drake saw an opportunity. He slowed his pace, allowing Rourke to pull ahead. The predator, sensing a vulnerable target, shifted its focus to the sergeant. Rourke, sensing the change, glanced back at Drake, a question in his eyes. Drake nodded, a silent communication passing between them. Rourke understood. He was the distraction, the bait. The predator lunged, its claws reaching for Rourke. But the sergeant was ready. He dodged to the side, the creature's momentum carrying it past him. Rourke spun, his heavy machine gun blazing. The bullets tore into the predator's flickering form, causing it to stumble, its roar turning into a pained shriek. Drake saw his chance. He drew his sidearm, a compact but powerful energy pistol. He took aim, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The predator turned, its eyes blazing with fury. But in that moment, Drake saw something else, something he had missed before. Beneath the rage, beneath the ancient hatred, there was a flicker of something else: confusion, perhaps even pain. It was a human emotion, a vulnerability that the predator, for all its power, could not comprehend. And in that moment, Drake knew what he had to do. He lowered his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. The predator snarled, anticipating the killing blow. But instead of firing, Drake did something unexpected. He slapped the creature across its grotesque face. Back at the makeshift base camp, a nervous energy crackled through the air. The team had managed to escape the collapsing temple, but the weight of their decision hung heavy in the cramped confines of the vanguard. Drake paced the narrow aisle, his boots echoing on the metal floor. His mind replayed the events of the past few hours, the harrowing escape, the desperate plan, the audacious slap. It had all been a blur, a chaotic dance of survival against an ancient evil. He glanced at his crew, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and grim determination. Rourke sat hunched over a table, cleaning his weapon with methodical precision, his usual boisterousness replaced by a quiet intensity. Tran huddled in a corner, her fingers flying across her datapad, analyzing the readings from the temple. Valen stood by the viewport, her gaze fixed on the desolate landscape outside, her expression unreadable. Drake cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "We've got a plan," he said, his voice rough from shouting over the chaos. It's a long shot, but it's our only shot. He outlined the strategy: lure the predator away from the monolith, weaken it, and then, well, they hadn't quite figured out the then part yet. But they had to try. We'll need to modify our exosuits, Tran said, her voice clipped and efficient. Boost the power output, reinforce the armor. We're going to need every advantage we can get. Rourke grunted in agreement. And we'll need more firepower. That thing shrugged off everything we threw at it last time. Drake nodded. We'll scavenge what we can from the Vanguard's armory. But remember, this isn't just about brute force. We need to use our heads, outsmart this thing. A sense of unease settled over the crew. They were preparing for a battle they couldn't possibly win, facing a creature that defied comprehension. But they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The Vanguard's armory was a stark, utilitarian space, its walls lined with racks of weapons and equipment. The air hummed with the power of the ship's life support systems, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the temple. Drake and Rourke methodically selected their gear, each piece chosen with a specific purpose in mind. They opted for heavier armor plating, sacrificing agility for protection. They loaded their weapons with high-impact rounds, hoping to penetrate the predator's shadowy hide, and they each carried a handful of experimental grenades, Tran's latest creations, designed to disrupt energy fields and destabilize matter. As they worked, a sense of camaraderie settled over them. They were soldiers, trained to face danger, to confront the unknown. But this was different. This was a fight for survival, not just for themselves, but for the entire galaxy. Drake caught Rourke's eye, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced death countless times before, but this felt different. This was a battle against an ancient evil, a force that had consumed worlds and extinguished civilizations. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Back in the main cabin, Tran and Valen worked feverishly, their fingers dancing across their datapads. They were modifying the exosuit's communication systems, hoping to create a localized disruption field that would interfere with the predator's connection to the monolith. It's a delicate balance, Tran explained, her voice tense. We need to disrupt the energy field enough to weaken the predator, but not so much that we destabilize the entire temple. Valen nodded, her eyes glued to the schematics on her screen. We're essentially poking a sleeping dragon. One wrong move, and we'll trigger a chain reaction that could bury us all. Despite the danger, a sense of excitement thrummed beneath their anxiety. They were on the cusp of something extraordinary, something that could change the course of history. The thought of facing the most feared predator in the galaxy, of defying the odds and emerging victorious, filled them with a sense of purpose that transcended fear. As the hours passed, the tension in the Vanguard grew. The crew worked tirelessly, their focus unwavering. They knew that every second counted, that the predator was growing stronger with each passing moment. Finally, the preparations were complete. The exosuits were modified, the weapons loaded, the grenades primed. The crew gathered in the main cabin, their faces grim but determined. Drake looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on their faces. We're going back in, he said, his voice steady. We're going to finish this. There were no cheers, no bravado, just a silent nod of understanding. They were ready. The airlock hissed open, releasing a blast of frigid air that cut through the Vanguard's artificial warmth. Drake stepped onto the alien soil, his boots crunching on the crystalline dust. The sky above was a dull, oppressive gray, the distant sun a mere smudge of light struggling to penetrate the thick clouds. The landscape was a wasteland of twisted metal and shattered stone, a testament to the predator's destructive power. The once proud temple now lay in ruins, its crumbling walls and collapsed corridors a grim reminder of their narrow escape. Drake signaled to the others, and they emerged from the ship, their exosuits gleaming in the dim light. They moved as a unit, their weapons at the ready, their senses attuned to the slightest sound or movement. The silence was unnerving. The predator's roars, which had once filled the air with terror, were now absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed down on them like a physical weight. "Spread out," Drake ordered, his voice low and steady. "Keep your comms open. We need to find it before it finds us." They fanned out, their boots kicking up clouds of dust as they moved through the ruins. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the lingering echoes of the predator's rage. Drake's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they were walking into a trap, but they had no other choice. They had to draw the creature out, force it into a confrontation on their terms. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the tension mounted. Every shadow seemed to harbor a lurking threat. Every whisper of the wind a chilling reminder of the predator's presence. Drake's grip tightened on his weapon. He could feel the predator's presence, a dark stain on the fabric of reality. It was out there, somewhere in the ruins, waiting for them to make a mistake. Suddenly, a tremor shook the ground, sending a cascade of debris tumbling from the crumbling walls. The crew instinctively crouched, their weapons trained on the source of the disturbance. A low growl echoed through the ruins, followed by the sickening crunch of stone. The predator was emerging from the depths of the temple, its shadowy form rising from the rubble like a vengeful spirit. Drake's heart hammered in his chest. The moment of truth had arrived. The predator burst from the ruins, its shadowy form towering over the scattered debris. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, scanned the battlefield, seeking its prey. Drake and Rourke exchanged a tense look. The creature was even more monstrous than they remembered, its form pulsating with dark energy. The air crackled with its presence, a tangible manifestation of its rage. "Open fire!" Drake shouted, and the team unleashed a torrent of energy blasts and bullets. The projectiles slammed into the predator's form, causing it to stagger, but its shadowy hide seemed to absorb most of the impact. The creature roared, its fury shaking the very ground beneath their feet. It lunged at Rourke, its claws outstretched like scythes. Rourke dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. The predator's claws raked the ground, leaving deep gouges in the stone. Valen and Tran, positioned on a nearby ridge, activated their disruption field. The air hummed with an invisible energy, and the predator's form flickered, its movements becoming erratic. "It's working," Valen shouted over the comms. "Keep it distracted." Drake and Rourke pressed their attack, their movements a carefully choreographed dance of evasion and aggression. They darted in and out of the predator's reach, their weapons blazing. The creature lashed out blindly, its frustration growing with each missed strike. The battle raged on, a whirlwind of dust and energy blasts. The predator's roars echoed through the ruins, a symphony of rage and pain. The ground trembled with each impact, the ancient temple groaning under the strain. Drake felt a surge of adrenaline, his senses sharpened by the imminent danger. He moved with a fluidity he hadn't known he possessed, his instincts guiding him through the chaos. But the predator was adapting. Its movements became more precise, its attacks more focused. It was learning, evolving, its rage fueling its relentless pursuit. Drake knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. They needed to find a way to end this, to deliver the final blow. But how? A sudden tremor sent a wave of panic through Drake. He glanced up, his heart sinking as he saw a massive chunk of the temple's ceiling teetering precariously above them. It was about to collapse, right on top of them. "Move," he roared, diving to the side. Rourke reacted instantly, his reflexes honed by years of combat. But the predator was slow to react, its attention still focused on its prey. The ceiling gave way with a deafening crash, burying the predator beneath tons of rubble. A cloud of dust billowed up, obscuring the creature from view. Drake and Rourke scrambled to their feet, their exosuits battered but intact. They exchanged breathless glances, a mix of relief and disbelief etched on their faces. Did we get it?" Rourke's voice was hoarse, his chest heaving. Drake shook his head. "I don't think so. It's too strong. It'll be out in a minute." He was right. The rubble began to shift, and a low growl rumbled from beneath the debris. The predator was struggling to free itself, its rage amplified by its temporary imprisonment. Drake's mind raced. They had bought themselves some time, but it wouldn't be enough. They needed to finish this, now. He glanced at Valen and Tran, who were still maintaining the disruption field. Their faces were pale with exertion, their bodies trembling from the strain. "How much longer can you hold it?" Drake shouted over the comms. "Not much," Tran's voice was strained. "The energy is fluctuating. We're losing control." Drake's heart sank. Their window of opportunity was closing fast. They had to act, and they had to act now. He looked at the Predator, still struggling to free itself from the rubble. Its form was flickering more violently now, its connection to the monolith weakening with each passing second. And then he saw it. A glimmer of vulnerability in the creature's eyes, a brief moment of hesitation as it sensed its power ebbing away. It was their chance. Drake made a split-second decision. He holstered his weapon, a move that made Rourke's eyes widen in disbelief. "Captain, what are you doing?" Rourke's voice crackled over the comms, laced with panic. Drake didn't answer. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. He had no idea if it would work, but he had to try. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled speed, he sprinted towards the struggling Predator. The creature, sensing his approach, roared in defiance, its shadowy form straining against the weight of the rubble. Drake reached the edge of the debris pile, his exosuit's boots sinking into the loose stones. He could feel the heat radiating from the Predator's body, the air thick with the stench of its rage. He took another deep breath, then leaped onto the pile, his momentum carrying him towards the creature. The Predator's eyes widened in surprise, its attention momentarily diverted from its struggle for freedom. Drake landed on the creature's back, his exosuit's magnetic boots clinging to its shadowy hide. The Predator thrashed wildly, trying to shake him off, but Drake held on tight, his fingers digging into the pulsating flesh. He reached out, his hand aiming for the creature's face. The Predator snarled, its jaws snapping inches from his visor. But Drake was undeterred. With all his strength, he slapped the creature across its cheek. The sound echoed through the ruins, a sharp crack that cut through the chaos of the collapsing temple. The Predator's roar turned into a startled yelp, its movements momentarily ceasing. Drake, his heart pounding in his chest, stared at the creature in disbelief. Had it worked? Had something so simple, so human, actually affected this monstrous being? The Predator's eyes, once blazing with fury, now held a flicker of confusion. It tilted its head, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. And then it roared again. But this time, the sound was different. It was no longer a roar of rage, but a cry of pain, of bewilderment. The creature's form began to shimmer, its shadowy hide dissolving into wisps of smoke. Its once solid body was unraveling, its connection to the monolith severed. Drake watched in awe as the Predator, the most feared creature in the galaxy, crumbled before his eyes, reduced to nothing more than a fading echo of its former self. A wave of silence descended upon the ruins, broken only by the soft crumbling of the ancient temple. Drake slid off the Predator's rapidly dissipating form, landing on the shifting rubble with a thud. He stood there, panting, his hands still stinging from the impact of the slap. The Predator, once a towering embodiment of dread, was now a mere wisp, its form barely clinging to existence. Its eyes, once burning with hatred, were now dim and vacant, reflecting the confusion and despair of a creature facing its own demise. Rourke emerged from the dust cloud, his weapon lowered, his expression a mix of shock and awe. "Captain, what just happened?" Drake shook his head, still struggling to process the events of the past few minutes. I don't know," he admitted, his voice hoarse, "but it worked. We did it." Valen and Tran joined them, their faces pale, but their eyes shining with triumph. They had witnessed the impossible, a creature that had defied the combined might of countless civilizations, brought low by a simple act of defiance. "It's gone?" Valen whispered, her voice barely audible. Tran nodded, her gaze fixed on the fading remnants of the Predator. "Its connection to the monolith is severed. It's unraveling." As they watched, the predator's form continued to dissipate, its shadowy essence dissolving into the air like smoke. Its roars, once deafening, were now mere whispers, fading into the silence of the ruins. The temple, sensing the shift in power, began to shudder violently. The ground beneath their feet buckled, and cracks snaked across the walls. The monolith at the center of the chamber pulsed one last time, its light fading into nothingness. "We have to get out of here," Drake said, his voice urgent. "The whole place is coming down." They turned and ran, their exosuits propelling them through the collapsing corridors. The ground shook with each step, and debris rained down from the ceiling, threatening to bury them alive. They reached the exit just as the temple's entrance collapsed, sealing them off from the outside world. They stumbled out into the open air, gasping for breath as they took in the sight of the vanguard, its sleek form a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape. They made it. They had faced the most dangerous predator in the galaxy and emerged victorious. But the victory was bittersweet. They had lost two of their own, and the weight of that loss hung heavy on their hearts. As they boarded the vanguard, Drake couldn't help but wonder about the true nature of the predator. What had it been? Where had it come from? And what had driven the creators to unleash such a horror upon the universe? The answers, he knew, were lost in the ruins of the temple, buried beneath tons of rubble. But one thing was certain: humanity had faced the darkness, and they had prevailed. And in that moment, Drake felt a surge of pride. They were human, and humans, it seemed, were capable of anything. The ground beneath their feet continued to tremble, the aftershocks of the temple's collapse sending shivers through their weary bodies. Drake watched as dust and debris swirled around the ruined entrance, a final curtain falling on the secrets buried within. A sense of finality hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. He turned to his remaining crew, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Rourke stood stoically, his jaw clenched, his eyes still scanning the horizon for any lingering threats. Vaylin leaned against a shattered wall, her shoulders slumped, her usual spark extinguished. "It's over," Drake said, his voice raspy. "We did it." But the words felt empty, devoid of the triumph they should have carried. The cost of their victory was too high. Tran cleared her throat, her voice hesitant. What about Lydia and Mira?" The silence that followed was deafening. Drake looked away, unable to meet their eyes. He had no answers, no words of comfort to offer. They had lost two of their own, and the pain of that loss was raw and agonizing. Rourke stepped forward, his voice gruff but gentle. "They died heroes," he said, his gaze sweeping over the ruins. "They saved us all." Vaylin sniffled, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. "They were the best of us," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Drake nodded, his throat tight. He knew they were right. Tran and Vaylin had given their lives to protect the galaxy, to ensure that the Predator's reign of terror would never be unleashed again. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. But the grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave of sorrow that threatened to drown them all. They had been a team, a family, bound together by shared experiences and a common purpose. Now, that bond was shattered, leaving a void that nothing could fill. As they stood there, amidst the ruins of the temple, a sense of emptiness settled over them. They had come to Veridion seeking answers, seeking to understand the mysteries of this forgotten world. They had found those answers, but at a terrible cost. The Predator was gone, its reign of terror finally ended. But the echoes of its existence, the scars it had left on their souls, would linger forever. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The air grew colder, the wind whispering through the ruins like the ghosts of the fallen creators. It was time to leave, to return to the world of the living, to face the consequences of their actions. Drake turned to his crew, his voice heavy with unspoken words. "Let's go home." They boarded the vanguard in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The ship's engines roared to life, breaking the oppressive stillness of the planet. As they ascended through the atmosphere, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving something behind, something unfinished. The mysteries of Veridion were far from solved, The creators, their motives, their technology all remained shrouded in enigma. The Predator, though defeated, had left its mark on them, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked in the depths of the universe. Drake sat in the captain's chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. He knew that their mission report would send shockwaves through the galaxy. The existence of the Predator, the revelation of the Creator's folly, it would all change the way humanity viewed its place in the cosmos. He glanced at Rourke and Valen, their faces etched with a mix of grief and determination. They had lost comrades, but they had also gained something invaluable, a newfound understanding of their own strength, their own resilience. "What do you think they were trying to do?" Valen asked, her voice soft, breaking the silence. "The creators, why did they create the Predator?" Rourke shook his head. "Power," he said, his voice gruff. "They wanted to control something they couldn't understand. They played with fire, and they got burned." Drake nodded. "They were arrogant," he said. "They thought they could bend the universe to their will, but they were wrong. The Predator was a force of nature, something beyond their comprehension, and it consumed them." A shiver ran down Valen's spine. "It's a cautionary tale," she said, "a reminder that there are some things we shouldn't meddle with." Drake leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the stars that twinkled beyond the viewport. "We've always been explorers," he said. "We've always pushed the boundaries, sought to understand the unknown. But maybe there are some things we're not meant to know." He paused, his thoughts drifting back to the moment he had slapped the Predator. It had been an instinctive act, a desperate attempt to break through the creature's rage. But it had also been something more, a human touch, a connection that had transcended the boundaries of species and dimensions. In that moment, Drake had glimpsed a truth that the creators had failed to grasp, that power alone was not enough. That empathy, compassion, the very essence of what it meant to be human, could be just as powerful, if not more so, than any weapon or technology. He looked at his crew, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's instruments. They were not the strongest, nor the most advanced beings in the galaxy, but they were human, and that, in the end, had made all the difference. The Vanguard hummed with a low, mournful vibration, a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos that had gripped them just hours before. Drake sat in the command chair, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a physical burden. He stared at the viewport, the endless expanse of stars, a cold reminder of the vastness and indifference of the universe. Beside him, Rourke stood silently, his burly frame radiating a sense of contained grief. His eyes, usually alight with a mischievous glint, were now dull and shadowed. He clenched and unclenched his fists, the muscles in his forearms rippling beneath his scarred skin. Valen, the youngest of the crew, sat huddled in a corner, her knees pulled to her chest. Her normally vibrant face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Silent tears traced paths down her cheeks, leaving streaks in the grime that clung to her skin. The ship's AI, its voice a gentle whisper in the oppressive silence, announced the completion of the post-mission diagnostics. "All systems nominal, Captain. We are ready for departure." Drake's voice was a raspy croak. "Set course for Earth." The ship shuddered as the engines engaged, propelling them away from the desolate moon. Veridion, once a beacon of hope for scientific discovery, now held only the ghosts of their fallen comrades and the echoes of a terrifying encounter. As the Vanguard accelerated, Drake's thoughts drifted to Tran and Valen. He remembered Tran's quiet brilliance, her ability to unravel the most complex puzzles with a few deft strokes on her datapad. He recalled Valen's infectious enthusiasm, her eagerness to explore the unknown, her dreams of charting new worlds. Their loss was a gaping wound in his heart, a constant reminder of his own fallibility. He had led them into danger, and he had failed to bring them all back. The guilt twisted in his gut, a knot of pain that refused to unravel. The ship's infirmary was a sterile, dimly lit space, its white walls and gleaming equipment offering little comfort in the face of their profound loss. Drake sat beside Rourke's bed, the big man's chest rising and falling with the rhythmic rasp of labored breaths. The infirmary's AI, its voice a soothing monotone, reported Rourke's condition. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe concussion. His vitals are stable, but he remains unconscious. Drake reached out, his hand hovering over Rourke's bandaged arm. He had always been the strong one, the unbreakable rock of the team. Now, he lay vulnerable, his strength sapped by the ordeal they had endured. Guilt gnawed at Drake's conscience. He had pushed them all too far, demanded too much. He had been so focused on the mission, on defeating the Predator, that he had failed to see the toll it was taking on his crew. He thought back to the final moments of the battle, the desperation in Tran's voice as she struggled to maintain the disruption field, the grim determination in Valen's eyes as she faced the collapsing temple. They had given their all, sacrificed everything, and he had been powerless to save them. A wave of anger surged through him, directed not at the Predator, but at himself. He had been blinded by his own ambition, his desire to prove humanity's worth in the face of cosmic horror. He had allowed his pride to cloud his judgment, and the consequences had been devastating. He squeezed Rourke's hand, his grip firm. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry." But there was no response. Rourke's face remained slack, his eyes closed, his dreams haunted by the horrors of Veridion. Drake rose to his feet, his legs heavy, his heart aching. He left the infirmary, the sterile silence a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. He wandered aimlessly through the ship's corridors, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. He passed Valen's quarters, the door slightly ajar. He hesitated, then pushed it open, stepping into the small, cramped space. Her personal belongings were scattered about, a testament to a life cut short. A datapad lay on her bunk, its screen filled with images of Earth, lush green fields, bustling cities, smiling faces. Drake picked up the datapad, his fingers tracing the familiar contours. He scrolled through the images, each one a poignant reminder of the life Valen had left behind, the dreams she would never fulfill. He closed his eyes, the weight of his grief threatening to crush him. He had failed them. He had failed them all. A soft chime echoed through the ship, startling Drake from his somber reverie. A message flashed on the comm panel. Incoming transmission from Admiral Hansen. Drake's heart pounded in his chest. Was it news of the rescue team? Or perhaps something more ominous? He activated the comm, his voice strained with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Admiral Hansen, this is Captain Drake. Report." Hansen's face materialized on the screen, his expression grave. "Captain, we've received your distress signal and the preliminary mission report. I don't know what to say." Drake's stomach clenched. He knew the news of their encounter with the Predator, the loss of 2 crew members, would not be easily digested. "We faced a threat beyond anything we've ever encountered, Admiral," he said, his voice heavy. "We did what we had to do to neutralize it." Hansen nodded slowly. "Your actions have saved countless lives, Captain, but the cost." His voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Drake closed his eyes, the images of Tran and Valen flashing before him. "We lost 2 good people, Admiral," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They made the ultimate sacrifice." Hansen's face hardened. "Their sacrifice will not be forgotten, Captain. But there are concerns. The nature of the threat you encountered, the technology involved. It raises questions that demand answers." Drake's grip tightened on the armrests of his chair. He knew what Hansen was getting at. The existence of the Predator, the revelation of the Creator's folly, it would all send shockwaves through the galaxy. The implications were staggering, the potential consequences terrifying. "We'll provide a full debriefing upon our return, Admiral," Drake said, his voice firm. "But for now, we need to focus on getting back to Earth." Hansen nodded. "Understood, Captain. We'll have a team ready to meet you upon arrival. Godspeed, Vanguard." The transmission ended, leaving Drake alone with his thoughts. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. They had faced the darkness, and they had survived. but the shadows of Veridion would follow them home, their echoes lingering long after the wounds had healed. The Vanguard continued its journey, a solitary speck traversing the vast cosmic ocean. The ship's interior was a somber reflection of its crew's emotional state. The mess hall, once filled with laughter and camaraderie, now echoed with the clinking of utensils against plates, the only sound in the otherwise oppressive silence. Rourke, his injuries mending but his spirit still wounded, sat alone at a table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. He stared at the swirling liquid, his thoughts a jumbled mess of regret and anger. He replayed the final moments of the battle, the desperate scramble through the collapsing temple, the agonizing decision to leave Tran and Valen behind. He slammed his fist on the table, the metal surface rattling under the impact. The sudden noise startled the ship's AI, its calming voice breaking the silence. "Is everything all right, Sergeant Rourke?" Rourke grunted, his voice rough with emotion. "Just fine, tin can. Just peaky." He pushed away from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. He needed to move, to do something, anything to distract himself from the gnawing pain in his chest. He wandered through the ship's corridors, his heavy footsteps echoing in the emptiness. He passed Valen's quarters, the door still slightly ajar. He hesitated, then pushed it open, stepping into the small, cramped space. Her bunk was neatly made, her personal belongings carefully arranged. A framed photo of her family sat on her desk, their smiles a stark contrast to the gloom that now permeated the room. Rourke picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the faces of Valen's parents, her siblings. He remembered her stories, her infectious laughter, as she recounted her childhood adventures on Earth. She had been so full of life, so eager to embrace the universe. He placed the photo back on the desk, a lump forming in his throat. He couldn't bear to stay in her quarters any longer, the memories too painful, the silence too oppressive. He left, closing the door softly behind him. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a part of himself behind, a piece of his soul forever entwined with the tragedy of Veridion. The Vanguard emerged from hyperspace, its sleek form gliding gracefully into Earth's orbit. The familiar blue marble, a haven of life amidst the cold expanse of space, filled the viewport, its beauty a stark contrast to the desolate landscapes of Veridion. But the sight brought little comfort to the weary crew. The weight of their mission, the burden of their loss, hung heavy on their shoulders. They were returning home, not as heroes, but as survivors scarred by the horrors they had witnessed. Drake stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the approaching planet. He could see the sprawling cities, the lush green continents, the vast oceans teeming with life. It was a world of beauty and wonder, a testament to the resilience of nature and the enduring spirit of humanity. But beneath the surface, Drake knew there was a darkness lurking, a shadow cast by the events on Veridion. The existence of the Predator, the revelation of the Creator's folly, it would all shake the foundations of human understanding, challenge the very core of their beliefs. He thought of the debriefing that awaited them, the endless questions, the probing inquiries, the accusations of recklessness and incompetence. He would have to face the families of the fallen, to bear the weight of their grief and their anger. He closed his eyes, the image of Tran's parents, their faces etched with sorrow, flashing before him. He could hear their voices, accusing him of failing their daughter, of sending her to her death. He opened his eyes, his jaw clenched. He would face their scrutiny, their judgment. He would answer for his decisions, for the lives lost under his command. But he would not apologize for what they had done. They had faced the darkness, and they had prevailed. They had saved countless lives, protected the galaxy from an unimaginable threat. The Vanguard entered Earth's atmosphere, its hull shimmering with heat as it descended towards the designated landing zone. The familiar sights and sounds of his home planet filled Drake with a bittersweet longing. He was eager to set foot on solid ground, to breathe fresh air, to feel the warmth of the sun on his face. But he also dreaded the storm that awaited them, the scrutiny, the judgment, the inevitable fallout of their mission. The ship landed with a gentle thud, its engines powering down with a final sigh. The airlock hissed open, revealing a team of officials waiting to greet them. Their faces were grim, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Drake stepped out of the ship, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He took a deep breath, the familiar scent of home filling his lungs. He was back, but the weight of Veridion pressed heavily on his shoulders. He turned to Rourke and Valen. Rourke's jaw was set, his eyes hardened by the ordeal. Valen's gaze was downcast, her shoulders slumped. They had survived, but the cost was etched on their faces. The officials approached, their footsteps crisp on the tarmac. The debriefing awaited, a reckoning with the truth of their mission and the sacrifices made. Drake met their gaze, a steely glint in his eyes. He was ready to face the storm. The debriefing room was a windowless chamber, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on the polished metal table. Drake, Rourke, and Valen sat on one side, their exosuits replaced by plain gray jumpsuits. Across from them, a panel of stern-faced officials, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion, scrutinized them from behind a stack of datapads. Admiral Hansen, his brow furrowed, cleared his throat. "Captain Drake, we appreciate your willingness to cooperate. We understand the circumstances were extraordinary, but we need a full and transparent account of what transpired on Veridion." Drake nodded, his gaze steady. "We encountered a hostile entity, Admiral, a creature of immense power, unlike anything we've ever seen before." One of the officials, a wiry man with a sharp nose and piercing eyes, leaned forward. "Can you describe this entity?" Drake hesitated, the memories of the Predator's shadowy form, its glowing eyes, sending a shiver down his spine. "It was amorphous," he said, choosing his words carefully. "A being of pure energy, capable of manipulating matter and emotions." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. The concept of a creature feeding on fear was unsettling, a violation of the natural order they had come to understand. "And the creators?" another official asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake's jaw tightened. "They were a highly advanced civilization, Admiral, but their pursuit of power led to their downfall. They created the Predator, attempted to control it, and failed." The room fell silent, the weight of Drake's words hanging heavy in the air. The officials absorbed the information, their minds grappling with the implications. A civilization, far more advanced than humanity, had been wiped out by their own creation. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition, the hubris of playing God. Hansen leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "And the slap, Captain?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Drake's hand instinctively reached for his cheek, the phantom sting of the impact still lingering. "It was a desperate act," he admitted. "We were outmatched, outgunned. We had to find a way to break the creature's hold on us." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the officials. "It was a human act, Admiral, a moment of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. And it worked." The officials stared at him, their expressions a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration. They had heard the rumors, the whispers of a human crew facing down the most feared predator in the galaxy and emerging victorious. But now, hearing it from Drake himself, the reality of their achievements sank in. Hansen cleared his throat, his voice regaining its composure. "Captain Drake, your actions have implications. The existence of the Predator, the revelation of the Creator's technology, it will change everything." Drake nodded, his gaze steady. "We understand, Admiral. We're prepared to face the consequences." The debriefing continued for hours, the officials grilling Drake, Rourke, and Valen with relentless precision. They wanted to know every detail, every nuance of their encounter with the Predator. They wanted to understand the technology, the motives of the creators, the implications for the galaxy. Drake answered their questions honestly, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. He described the Predator's terrifying power, its ability to manipulate matter and emotions. He recounted the creators' tragic downfall, their hubris and ambition leading to their own destruction. And he explained, as best he could, the inexplicable moment when a simple slap had shattered the Predator's hold on reality. The officials listened intently, their faces a mask of concentration. They took notes, whispered amongst themselves, their minds reeling from the revelations. The very foundations of their understanding of the universe were being shaken, the comfortable assumptions of their place in the cosmos challenged. As the debriefing drew to a close, Hansen addressed the crew, his voice heavy with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. "Captain Drake, your actions have consequences. The galaxy will never be the same." Drake nodded, his expression somber. He knew that their mission had opened a Pandora's box, unleashing a wave of questions and anxieties that would reverberate throughout the interstellar community. The news of their encounter spread like wildfire, transmitted across the vast network of communication channels that connected the countless worlds of the galaxy. The existence of the Predator, the revelation of the Creator's folly, it all sparked a frenzy of speculation and debate. Some hailed the crew of the Vanguard as heroes, their courage and ingenuity a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. Others condemned them as reckless fools, their actions a dangerous gamble that could have unleashed untold horrors upon the galaxy. But amidst the cacophony of voices, one thing was clear: humanity's place in the universe had shifted. No longer were they seen as a mere footnote in the grand cosmic narrative. They were survivors, warriors, capable of facing the darkness and emerging victorious. The slap, that simple act of defiance, had become a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a universe shrouded in shadow. It had shown that even the most fearsome creatures could be challenged, that even the most ancient evils could be overcome. And as the news spread, a sense of pride swelled within the hearts of humanity. They were not alone in the cosmos. They were not insignificant. They were capable of facing the unknown, of confronting the darkness, and of prevailing against all odds. The age of humanity had begun.